Welcome to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast, your guide to future tech trends and innovation in a language you understand. Now, over to your host, Neil Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast, where every episode I talk about how technology is transforming multiple industries. But at the heart of any technological solution, there is always a very human story. Now, I always say on here that I want to use this platform so that everybody listening, whether you are a student or someone on their own startup or entrepreneurial journey, or even a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, what I can promise you is that we will always try and learn something from every single guest and their unique story that they tell on this show. Equally, I always encourage everyone listening to come on and share their story too. But today's guest has more stories than most. If the legend is to be believed, Steve Jobs walked up to the Pepsi CEO John Sculley in the 80s and delivered the immortal line, "Do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life, or do you want to come work with me and change the world?" The rest, as they say, is history. And I don't want to focus too much on his past because much of that has been documented already. Instead, I want to know more about what inspired him on his journey and also what he learned along the way, how he's trying to make a difference now, and what advice he can offer listeners today. And of course, what it felt like having Jeff Daniels play him in an Aaron Sorkin movie. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to Palm Beach, Florida, so we can speak with John Sculley. So welcome to the show, John, and taking the time to speak with us all today.
Thank you. Nice to be on.
We have everyone from entrepreneurs at various stages of their startup journeys to CEOs listening in over 160 different countries. And I always ask each guest to share their story to inspire others that are listening to our conversation as I record each podcast. Now, many will be familiar with some aspects of your career, but not that you went from driving Pepsi trucks to becoming the Pepsi CEO within 10 years. So for our younger listeners that are new to your career, can you offer an overview of your inspirational story and what your big drivers were along the way?
Well, there's always luck involved, and that's true with even the most successful entrepreneurs that I've known in my lifetime, and it was certainly true with me. I had been working after I got my MBA at Wharton Business School. I'd been working in New York for Coca-Cola's advertising and marketing agency, and I had learned a lot from the analytical side about the soft drink industry, and then I got hired by Pepsi as their first MBA, and they didn't really know what to do with me. So they said, well, let's put him out on a Pepsi truck and let him learn the ropes. And I was sent out to Pittsburgh, and I drove a route truck, and I worked in the bottling plant. And I was then transferred out to Phoenix, Arizona to get a different experience. And we would get up at 4 in the morning because it's so hot in Phoenix in the summertime to go out and work on putting Pepsi signs up on tin roofs. In the daytime, the temperature can get up to 125 degrees Fahrenheit. And I was doing all kinds of different things of resetting shelves in the middle of the nighttime and, learning the ropes. Well, it turned out that was the best thing that ever could have happened in my life because while I was doing that, I was observing, learning, and years later, when I got a chance to actually get in charge of marketing, many of the innovations, like the creation of the first 2-liter plastic bottle, like the creation of the Pepsi Challenge campaign, many of these things were inspired by things I observed when I started out as a trainee. So my advice to a young listener is always be curious, always reach out and take risks. Don't worry about if it doesn't seem obvious to you, what you may learn from a particular experience, but take it all in because you may well find, as I did, ways to draw on that experience later on.
Now, you have enjoyed a fantastic career. However, I don't want to concentrate too much on your past, but more about how that experience is helping you to make a difference even now. So can you tell me more about how your time at Apple actually led to your current role as a disruptor in the healthcare industry too?
When I went to Apple, first time I showed up at the Apple office was in 1982. It was in the early days of the high-tech industry, and it was very different than Silicon Valley is today. It was all engineers, very technical, And I was the first consumer marketing person from corporate America to ever show up in Silicon Valley. Most people had never even heard of Silicon Valley, if you came from the East Coast of the United States or even other parts of the world. So for me to be working with, brilliant founders like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and Andy Grove and people like that was eye-opening. And I understood that things were happening that were so different. In my world, it was all about competition. Pepsi versus Coke, who wins, who loses. I discovered in this world that it wasn't about getting more market share in an existing industry. It was about creating an entirely new industry. In this case, personal computers and software for personal computers and microprocessors for personal computers. So this whole idea that entrepreneurs could actually create an entirely new industry, and they thought in entirely different ways, was really something that has stuck with me through the decades.
So what is the future of disruption in healthcare right now, do you think?
Well, in the U.S. market, and that's the one I know the best from the healthcare standpoint, healthcare is now about 18% of our GDP. It is unsustainable at its current rate of spend. The society is aging, and so the problem only becomes more significant as time goes on. And the politicians are all debating about do we replace Obamacare or do we repair Obamacare? In reality, it has very little to do with how do we make the healthcare system cost sustainable for an aging population. And the reason for that is that just 2% of this $3.2 trillion a year U.S. healthcare industry, 2% represents 40% of the health spend. And that 2% of the population are chronically ill. So there's no way to make a sustainable U.S. healthcare system unless we can significantly transform the way we deliver healthcare to that most expensive patient, the 2% of the population who represent 40% of the health spend. These are people who may have 9 chronic care diseases. They may be taking 15 to 25 medications a day. And the healthcare system was never set up to be able to deal with that in a more efficient way. So if we can solve that problem, and it's always about defining the problem. You never start with the technology. You always start with, so what's the big customer problem out there that you want to solve? And this is true for other industries, not just healthcare. That's what I've been focusing on the last 10 years in the healthcare.
Does that frustrate you at all, seeing a lot of companies now that put the technology first, or if they're looking for a solution, they go technology first rather than the problem, rather than the solution, before even thinking about technology? Yeah,
many people, they assume that because there's so much going on with disruptive technology that you should start with the technology first. The reality is that the big success stories always start with, so what's the customer problem? So let's take Facebook. Facebook didn't start with the technology. Facebook said, how do we connect people to people and become the most important people connector in the world? Google didn't start with technology. Google said, how can we enable people to be able to navigate the World Wide Web? And the most innovative companies almost always start with what's the big customer problem to solve, and then the technology can be folded in. And it's actually easier to attract the best technologists to want to work with you. Steve Jobs was a brilliant recruiter, and he recruited people because he had a vision. His vision was he wanted to build a personal computer for non-technical people, so that these non-technical people would be able to do what he called amazing things with their bicycle for the mind. And it was starting with the user experience, not with the technology, which has been consistent in Apple's history and its incredible success.
So I'm just listening to you talk there, do you think that really, the reality is that the entire healthcare industry is ripe for disruption right now?
Oh, absolutely. Again, my perspective is from the U.S.
Yeah.
But the reason I say that with a lot of confidence is that the technologies that have already disrupted e-commerce, media, the social media, with telecommunications, with financial services, cloud computing, big data analytics, more recently, machine learning and artificial intelligence. These technologies haven't even been deployed in any significant way in the healthcare industry. So here is the largest industry in the United States, $3.2 trillion a year, and the majority of it's running on 30-year-old technology. For instance, one of the areas that I'm very involved with is in the Rx ecosystem. Rx is the prescription drug ecosystem. And the technology that is used and what's called PBMs, or pharmacy benefit managers, these are the ones who adjudicate the reimbursements from health insurance companies, back through pharmacies and health plans to pharmaceutical companies, that they're running on technology that's built on IBM AS400s that are 30 years old. Green screens, command line, COBOL programming. This is the world that I saw when I showed up in Silicon Valley back in 1982. And here it is, 2018, and they're still running on ancient technology. So one of the things I'm very involved in is bringing smart automation into things like how do we manage the entire continuum of care for chronic care patients to enable the physicians and the nurse practitioners and other health professionals and the consumers themselves to be able to see the drug interactions, to monitor drug adherence, to be able to avoid duplication of drugs, to avoid people getting readmitted back into the hospital when they've been discharged. We're talking about tens of billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars of potential savings every year.
I know when you mentioned there's experiencing old technology that you've seen there for years, I get the exact same feeling when I enter an airport and I see a Windows XP screensaver somewhere. It makes me incredibly nervous. But we do have people listening all over the world, and something I did want you to comment on was the recent Amazon JP Morgan Berkshire healthcare announcement. Not everyone would have heard it, but could you just expand on that a little bit, what that announcement was, and also how you think it will disrupt the industry?
Well, I would say it's kind of a shot that's heard around the world in healthcare. And ironically, they didn't say exactly what they were going to do. In fact, They said they don't even have a plan yet. So let me just summarize what the announcement was. Here are three of the most admired CEOs in the world. So you have Warren Buffett, you have Jamie Dimon, and you have Jeff Bezos. Between the three of them, they have something over 1 million employees. And they said there are so many inefficiencies in the U.S. healthcare system that we're going to focus on improving the efficiencies and the experience and the outcomes for the 1 million employees that we have combined. And in fact, we're going to not just do an alliance, we're going to start an entirely new company. It may actually not be a company designed to make profit for the company, but it's one to save money for our three companies through our employees. And just the fact that those highly respected leaders came out and said that they were going to do something that was a clear action has awakened the entire healthcare industry in the U.S. because everybody is saying, wow, what are they up to? If we don't pay attention to this, we may miss out and be disrupted. So I think it's a great wake-up call for America in this case, because they're talking about the U.S. businesses, in terms of how can we start to get real innovators focused on revolutionizing the U.S. healthcare system. And believe me, I've been spending 10 years in this space, and we've had a number of significant successes in various companies that I've been involved with. It's a totally solvable problem. The reason it hasn't happened yet is because the U.S. healthcare system is so incredibly complex. Not complex because of the technologies. The technology is relatively well understood because of how it's been deployed in other industries. What's complex are the special interests, the lobbyists who lobby for all kinds of carve-outs and special conditions and protocols and precedents of our system, so that the ability to bring in smart automation is far more difficult. And in fact, Google tried it a number of years, failed and backed out. Microsoft did the same. They tried and failed and backed out. And so now people are starting to realize, well, it is going to take high-tech innovation, but it's going to take a great deal more domain expertise into how the complexity of the healthcare system can be harnessed and unwound and be able to take advantage of technology. And so the team I'm working with up in Boston at RxAdvance, our company, we're only less than 5 years old. We'll do $10 billion of contracted revenue this year. There aren't many companies that have been able to grow that fast, and we think we can get up to between 30 and $40 billion of revenue over the next 4 or 5 years. So even though those sound like big numbers, they're still relatively small numbers in the context of a $3.2 trillion health industry. And if we're successful, which we are, there'll be others like us. There'll be other role models, and this is what the healthcare industry needs. It needs some role models from even a handful of companies that can say, hey, you really can make a difference and transform this industry that has stymied so many politicians over the last few decades.
Now, there are so many big tech trends at the moment, such as blockchain, cryptocurrencies, augmented reality and artificial intelligence, and they're all promising to increase efficiencies and simplify things and actually create greater transparency. But to choose just one of those, what role do you think artificial intelligence could have in particular in the healthcare industry in the future?
Well, I'm deeply involved in artificial intelligence. I've been involved actually ever since I was in graduate school with Bayesian statistical modeling and Markov chain analysis, Monte Carlo game theory. Many of the building blocks of what is called machine learning today. So I'm a great enthusiast in terms of the potential for machine learning to have a significant role in healthcare. Here's why. What machine learning is really doing is taking massive amounts of data, and it's able to personalize at an individual level the exact things. It may be, how do you identify which people ought to be matched up with which kinds of, treatments? How do you get people to feel that healthcare is being simplified and customized and offered to them in ways that is very easy to modify their behavior? For example, take Alexa, which Amazon has introduced and really excited the whole world in terms of what's possible with a voice assistant. And so I think the ability to use new user interfaces that are driven by machine learning that can simplify the relationship between the patient, who is really a consumer, and the types of medical services that they may need, anything from wellness to preventive medicine to even sick care. There are huge opportunities to bring in predictive analytics, really, which is what machine learning is, on a massive scale. So it's going to be a big building block for the reinvention of how we deliver healthcare.
Why is it that you believe that healthcare is your noble cause? And what was it that actually inspired you to pursue this healthcare disruption?
I had been at Apple about 3 months, and I was sitting around one evening with Steve Jobs and Bill Gates in the Macintosh engineering lab. It was still about a year before the Macintosh was going to be a finished product and launched in the market. And Steve Jobs and Bill Gates were talking, this is late at night, talking about their noble cause, that they were going to change the world, one person at a time. They were going to empower knowledge workers with tools for the mind. And I'm sitting there listening to it, and they called this their noble cause. Well, I had come from the cola wars, Pepsi versus Coke. Someone wins, someone loses. I'd never heard the words noble cause before in business. And that has stuck with me through the decades. And one of my very close friends, Bob Metcalf, who is actually the person who invented Ethernet, which is, as many people know, are the architecture and protocols for the Internet. He was telling me about 10 years ago, he said, John, people like you and me need to reinvent ourselves about every 10 years. Go off and try something entirely different. So I thought about that, and I kept coming back to, so is there a noble cause that I could get involved with? And I decided to choose healthcare, because I said, this is a problem that is of such a scale that it is affecting society. it's only going to become more acute as the population ages. And it is, the more I got into it, the more I realized that the things that I had learned along the way about consumer engagement and how you can build platform systems, because I've done it in other industries, that we could bring many of those ideas into the healthcare industry. And so this is what I've been primarily focusing on over the past 10 years.
What a fantastic story. Now, I also read a great interview with you recently where you spoke about how we live in an era today where we can get the answers to anything and everything almost on demand. And this really resonated with me because growing up, for me, when I was at school, was about learning the answers. But now you could just get them straight away. So how do you think education should actually evolve and reflect this massive change?
Well, I've been thinking a lot about education because I remember when I was at school, and I was sent off to boarding school for 6 years, very English type experience. And the entire focus was on memorization, memorizing facts, being tested for those. And I've never seen that being anything remotely like what the experience is once you're out of school. The experience once you're out of school, particularly if you're going to be an entrepreneur, it's all about thinking about how can you solve a problem and how can you do it in maybe a team working together with other people, and how you're learning, by meeting and trying and hands-on experience. It has nothing to do with memorizing facts. And so when I think about education, I think about why do we even have examinations in education? We don't have examinations in business. The exception might be, if you're a doctor, let's say, and you have to have examinations to be able to show that you're staying current, each year, at least we do in the States, that's part of the protocol. But for most people, examinations isn't what you do. What you do is you have outcomes. You have to produce something. You have to create something of value. So it has nothing to do, in my opinion, with taking exams. So when I look at the experience of education experience of some of the most successful people, what, for example, do Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, Larry Page, Sergey Brin, and Mark Zuckerberg all have in common in their education? The answer is they all went to Montessori school. And Montessori is a hands-on experience. It's one that is getting students to be curious about things, working together. It's all the things which we all do when we're beyond school. We're out in the real world. So I think that there are role models for how to build a better education system. Technology can help. The idea that you have to go to a hall and listen to a professor give a presentation when you can get it online. It's much more important to have people in discussion groups. Sometimes those can be done virtually. Sometimes they can be done face-to-face. So I think there's huge opportunities to disrupt the way people are educated.
So if we do have a young entrepreneur that's listening to you today, share your story while they're walking their dog in the gym or even on the train to the office in the morning, what's the best advice that you could pass down to them to help them thrive and survive in a digital age where roles that they're going to take are probably don't even exist yet?
Well, the estimates are, I think it was McKinsey and Company said that by 2030, that 35% of all the jobs descriptions will disappear.
Yeah.
Now, there'll be new kinds of jobs that hopefully replace those. It won't all be robots and artificial intelligence. But the reality is that the best way to prepare yourself, if you're a young person and you want to be an entrepreneur, remember this, curiosity, leads achievement. And if you want to achieve at something, if you want to be able to solve a problem in a different, better way, it always starts with curiosity. If I say what characteristic has sort of shaped my life ever since I was a young boy, 6 years old, 7 years old, I've been insatiably curious about things. From taking radios apart when I was a young kid, to building experimental television sets, to building go-karts, to even working at Pepsi bottling plants. I've always been curious. And curiosity is something I think you find fundamental in the most successful entrepreneurs. Now combine that with something else, and that something else is you want to become a risk taker. Not everybody is a risk taker. I am a risk taker. I'm willing to take risks, which means I'm willing to fail. And what you learn in life is that the biggest learning moments come from your failures, not your successes. But you've got to take the time to understand why you failed. In Silicon Valley, the first thing when someone fails is, so what did you learn? There are many parts of the world where if you fail, you may not get a second chance. That's not true in Silicon Valley. It's not true in the most innovative companies. Making mistakes, we say in the high-tech world, fail fast, learn fast. So the combination of curiosity leads to achievement. Be a risk taker, take risks, because even if you fail from time to time, you're going to try to learn the most you can from the experience.
Now, I do get to speak to a lot of tech leaders from all over the world on this show, and I often ask them, who would they like to play them in a movie if ever one was made? But you, of course, have already been portrayed by Jeff Daniels. I mean, would he have been your first choice? And did he actually reach out for you for any pointers when he was obviously representing you, a movie version of you?
Well, it was a very interesting experience because Aaron Sorkin, who wrote the Steve Jobs movie, actually reached out to both me and Steve Wozniak. He never told us, nor did Danny Boyle, who was the Academy Award-winning director who did the movie. They never told us what the story was going to be about, but they did invite us out to the set. We did meet with Michael Fassbender, who played Steve Jobs. We did meet with Jeff Daniels, and I would have to say Jeff Daniels, couldn't have been nicer. He wanted to kind of see what it was like in the way I talk, and just kind of study the person he was going to represent. After the movie was made, Jeff was playing on Broadway in a revival of a play he'd been in years before called Blackbird, and he invited my wife Diane and I to come to the show and see it one night, and we all had dinner afterwards. And he couldn't have been more gracious. So I feel very privileged that Jeff Daniels was selected to play my part.
And overall, were you happy with the movie itself? Because there was a lot of misunderstandings there, and there's almost, it's a piece of entertainment. It's not historical fact, a lot of it, is it?
That's absolutely right. Aaron Sorkin said, look, I wasn't doing a biopic on Apple.
Yeah.
He said, I'm in the entertainment business. And the reason he wrote the story the way he did, according to Aaron, was that he was so upset by the fact that Steve Jobs had denied any relationship with his daughter for so long. Eventually, in the end of the movie, if you want to see it, there is a reconciliation between Steve Jobs and his daughter Lisa. But the whole theme of the movie had much more to do about Steve Jobs and the relationship with his daughter than it did about other things. So it was not an Apple biopic. As Aaron said, I thought of it more like a painting than I did a photograph.
Yeah.
So it was not completely accurate in terms of all the historical details, but he was trying to tell a side of Steve Jobs' personality.
Fantastic. Well, a huge thank you for taking the time to come on and share your story today. I've got no doubt at all it's going to be very inspirational for a lot of people listening. Like I say, this show is going to be listened to in 162 different countries, and you never know who's going to hear your message and learn from your life experience, which I think is a fantastic thing, and one of the reasons I enjoy doing this. So again, a big thank you for coming on.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be with you.
What I loved about our conversation with John today is that he's enjoyed so much success at companies like Pepsi and Apple, but that passion to make a difference and be curious is clearly stronger than ever. And I am fortunate on this podcast that I get to speak to a lot of people, and very often some are clearly more interested in the money side of things. And as an ageing man myself, let me tell you that is the road to nowhere. And I could have listened to John speaking all night, sharing his stories about Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, etc. But again, more than anything, it's about understanding what motivates these hugely successful and talented individuals. To think of John Sculley, Bill Gates and Steve Jobs talking about their noble causes and how they wanted to make a difference, that is a golden moment right there for me. because I can open up a Reddit forum right now and there are thousands of people jumping on that crypto gold rush or bandwagon, all trying to make a million. But you don't find happiness solely focusing on money or shortcuts or Lambos. Noble causes, making a difference, being curious about the world around you and technology. For me, that's the cool stuff. That's the fun stuff. That's what makes you get out of bed in the morning. But hey, that's also just me on my soapbox. So over to you. Please let me hear your thoughts on today's show, the topics we've discussed. You can tweet me at Neil C. Hughes. You can always reach me on email by sending me a quick message to techblogwriter@outlook.com. And if you go to my website, techblogwriter.co.uk/podcast, you can listen to any of the episodes from the podcast, but you can also record me a virtual voicemail, which we can play on a future episode. But all that's left for me to say, though, is a big thanks for listening. I'll also cordially invite you back tomorrow to do it all again with another great guest on our Daily Tech podcast, which I hope is just as much about human stories as it is about technology. There's a lot of talk at the moment about AI taking jobs, but I think humans and technology are going to be working closer together than ever before. And it's those two polar opposites that actually complement each other. But we'll save that for another episode. So until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thanks for listening to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast. Until next time, remember, technology is best when it brings people together.